Everything. Tell me everything.
Well, thanks, Pat, for joining me on Tell Me Everything. How are you today?
I'm good. Excited to be back working and excited the time we're recording. It's Monday, so excited for the Bears game tonight.
Oh, I know. I actually know like a lot of people who are heading to that tonight. So, yeah. Are you in Chicago?
In the suburbs, yeah. Not going to the game. And I'm actually excited about the fact that they're going to build a stadium outside of the city in Arlington Heights.
Yeah, I bet that would be much nicer. It was just the stadium isn't bad, but it's old, isn't it?
It was Soldier Field, which is very old, and they rebuilt part of it, and it looks like a spaceship landed on top of it inside of the columns that they had to keep because they were a historical landmark. And it's a nice, like, some part, the seats are nice, like the boxes are nice and all that stuff. The food's fine, but parking is terrible. Traffic is awful. Getting out of that stadium afterwards, if you parked, is impossible. And if you drove and parked somewhere nearby, or you're going to public transportation, it's like a 30 to 45-minute walk to get anywhere reasonable. And it's just like, it's a whole thing. And so they need to go rebuild that somewhere that they can actually build around it and set it up so that people can get there and park and tailgate and everything else.
They did that. So I'm in Atlanta, and they did that for our Braves Stadium, and for the Falcon Stadium, the Mercedes-Benz. That was in a better. It's still downtown, Mercedes-Benz's, but it is at least where there's parking around it. And the Braves Stadium is awesome. So hopefully they'll kind of do something similar.
They're going to do that for the Bears in Arlington Heights. They did it for the Cubs, obviously, with Wrigleyville. It's built around there. The people that own the Bulls and the Blackhawks, which is Jerry Reinsdorf and Danny Wirtz, they're building and investing in the entire area around the United Center where they play. So like the Bears need to do the same thing. Right now it's in the middle of a park district and backs up to the lake, and it's a great spot, but it's also very inconvenient to get to if you're trying to get there on a Sunday during a game.
I'm sure they'll do something similar to like what they did with the Cubs, because the Wrigley area, whatever, because that is like it's so nice not having to go into the game, but still experience the game, Very cool. Well, awesome. So I know you got lots going on in your world and building a whole platform, and but you started off as a broker, and is that how you started off in logistics, or did you do other things?
Very first job I had was at a grocery store, bagging groceries in Highland Park, Illinois. And then the next summer I was a cashier. I made $7 an hour the first summer, and then $7.65 an hour the second summer. And it was a big increase. And I was a cashier the second summer. And then that third summer, I think I did an internship. I did an internship with Sears Holdings Corporation with the Kmart marketing department, and learned a little bit about marketing, I guess, at the time. It's not, I don't know that they give credit for like my like attention to marketing now, but spent some time on that then. And then the next summer I spent like a few weeks working at Blockbuster. And at the same time, I was also, this was 2007. And so, my dad had just started Coyote the year before and was just getting started. And I decided to intern there for part of the summer, and I was tracking loads, and I'd call drivers and dispatch them and ask them if they, figure out where they were picking up, if they had hours of service to go do that. They didn't have any ELDs at the time. It was just paper logs. They'd always ask if you could send information to their Qualcomm. And so I did that for a while, where I was just tracking loads. And then one day, Mark Ford, I don't know if you've met Mark, but he's at Highway now, but Mark ran the carrier department at Coyote for a long time, and he came over to my desk and was like, "Hey, we want to have you start calling on these loads." And so I started by calling on Visi Paper, freight, like rolls of paper, 45,000 pounds, going from Staten Island, New York to Worcester, Massachusetts. And Mark said, start at $400. The start paying the loads at $400, and the highest you could go is $475. And so he said, start at the start, go to the highest end, and like, let me know, or let somebody know, or let Nick know if you find something. And so I called all these carriers in the Northeast, New York and Massachusetts, asking them if they ever, it was mainly Massachusetts. He said, start calling carriers in Massachusetts, find out if they ever get to New York and they need a backhaul back home. And so started calling all these guys in Massachusetts and then New York to see if they would haul freight from Staten Island to Worcester, Mass. I got hung up on by like every single carrier for that price. And, they're going to the island. And so the hope is like they're already there and they need to load back out. And so, yeah, that was how I got started, was working there. I was a kid at American Backhaulers, but I had no idea what my dad did at the time. I didn't know anything about freight until I started working at Coyote when I was 19.
I feel like they always on purpose put you in a spot where you have to call out on super difficult lanes. Like my first lane that I had to work was a postal lane from, I think it was Atlanta, Georgia, Flushing, New York. And it was like, I don't even know, so cheap because it was postal freight. It was contracted lanes. Like they're like, you need to find a dedicated carrier that will run that in and out, in and out. And then they're like, of course, the carriers are like, are you going to pay for my tolls? I'm like, no, you just have to incorporate that with you. I mean, like, I had no idea what I was doing.
Dedicated freight is great, though, because that's, set it and forget it as long as you find the right carrier that'll haul that freight. I think most of my career has been starting with the really tough stuff and trying to figure it out. Like, I spent a few years operating battery freight. Like, I was assigned to Exide and Interstate Battery when I was living in San Diego, and my job ended up being to cover that freight, and that freight goes everywhere. It was going in the City of Industry, California, in Yuma, Arizona, El Paso, Laredo, going into Muncie, Indiana, Salina, Kansas, Manchester, Iowa. It was all over the country. And so I learned how to book freight all over the country, and I had to book with these, I was mostly Chicago shade, honestly, except they would never take loads to Laredo or El Paso. And I also ended up developing relationships with those warehouses in Laredo and El Paso and in City of Industry in Yuma. And I ended up working with those people much, later. Like, they're still friends of mine that I still talk to on a regular basis. And so I always started with like the really tough stuff. With Mexico freight, it was automotive to start, and also tequila that required security escorts for it was a very popular brand at the time. It's no longer as popular anymore because the person who started that brand is in prison right now, but he's a rapper. But
Yeah.
it's you always have to start with the tough stuff. And my belief is that if you cut your teeth on the really difficult freight, like moving Mexico freight, moving automotive freight from Mexico, if you can nail automotive just in time or just in sequence freight, anything else moving cross border is easier than that.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. So I guess I met you a while ago, but I kind of got to talk to you and hang out with you in Birmingham at the TIA regional meeting. And you gave your whole spiel on kind of how to get into Mexico market stuff. Like, and honestly, prior to, I was like, that stuff is scary. I don't even want to look at it, touch it. Like, somebody else will handle that who speaks Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. I don't, or I took Spanish, but I don't speak Spanish. And so I think you made it seem like, oh, this is actually doable for whatever level of broker you are. So is that kind of how you took the stance whenever you started getting into Mexico freight yourself, or was it kind of like somebody else guided you there, or how did you get to that point?
So so I had, this goes like really far back to the battery stuff. I was booking all these battery loads going from Phoenix, Arizona to Yuma, Arizona, and they were delivering into a facility called DC Logistics. And DC also had a facility in Phoenix, and they owned trucks in Arizona and California. They're LTL and warehousing. And so one day they called and said, hey, I'm like, all these battery loads are delivering to my facility. I have trucks in Phoenix. Can I pick up those trucks and deliver them myself? And because I was assigned to that battery account, I ended up being the one that worked with them to start booking them on that freight. So I was basically booking private fleet capacity essentially on a related customer's backhaul freight or freight going back in the Yuma. And so I started booking all this freight, and it was good freight as far as like, as a carrier rep goes and as commission goes. And so there were these other loads for a large CPG manufacturer, beverage company, going from the Phoenix area back to Yuma. So a very similar lane to the batteries, but the big difference was that it was loading, these battery loads would load between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. And first come, first serve, it would take like 20 minutes. There were these junk batteries that were palletized that just needed to go back to a warehouse. And meanwhile, these beverage loads were at a warehouse or at a facility that was producing it, that was coming off of a line. You would have your appointments would be like anywhere between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. And you would be you would go get loaded. It would take like 4 hours to get loaded. Your delivery would be the next morning. Like I begged DC to take these loads, and they would take like 2 loads, and then their drivers would get stuck all night, and they would screw up their entire delivery schedule the next day, and they'd be like, I can't do these loads. Like I can do these Coke loads or these battery loads, but I cannot do these other loads. And so um they like I got a lot of flack from other people on the team for the fact that I was covering what seemed like the easy freight and not the tough freight. And so I decided to go and spend like a couple weeks trying to develop the lane. And by develop, I mean like I called every carrier I could find that would move freight from Phoenix to Yuma, whether they would haul batteries or beverages. Like there's other freight moving on that lane for collectively across 3 or 4 different customers. And so I was like, I'm just going to own this Phoenix to Yuma lane and I'll figure it out. And so I called every carrier I could find in Phoenix and Yuma, and I opened up the radius kind of, if you will, around Yuma. And I thought like, I'll call everybody in Yuma and Calexico. And so one of the carriers that I found based in Calexico was a carrier named TBM Carriers. They were not willing to haul that freight either because they mainly ran long haul and they serviced Mexico. And I was like, well, we don't have any Mexico freight, but I do a freight from like Washington back down to the border to like San Diego or Calexico. And so I would book them on these loads unrelated, going back down to the border, back down to San Diego. And they became a carrier that I worked with regularly, and I still have a relationship with them today. And as fast forward, I moved back to Chicago. I'm in our private fleet department. I spent almost a little under a year in private fleet. And one day, a sales rep sent out an email to the whole company saying, I have these truckloads of toothpaste that are coming out of Mexico from going from Nuevo Laredo to Ohio to Georgia and a couple other places. And can anybody help cover them? And so I was like, oh, yeah, let me offer them to TBM and see if they want them, because they've like told me that they'll do Mexico before. And I had a second carrier, Rich Logistics, that I'd also been working with. Same deal. They were heavily focused on Mexico automotive freight. And so I offered them this freight, and they both like quoted it, and I covered a bunch of freight, made a bunch of commission on it, and started looking for more Mexico freight. And so I was able to really easily book those first few loads. They were like relatively easy lanes because they were just on the Mexican side of the border. It's not like deep into Mexico, but I started to move that freight, and I was making way more commission on the Mexico freight than I was making on like the domestic freight that I was booking with private fleet capacity. And I was working with like Bob Evans, like private fleet, and a wide range of fleets, but this was more profitable and
Yeah.
more interesting, honestly. And so I started going and booking more of that freight. And then one day, Eddie Leshin came over to my desk, who was the chief operating officer, and he said, what are you doing booking all this Mexico freight? Your job is private fleet. Like your stuff doesn't count towards the private fleet team. And I'm like, well, I'm making more money on this Mexico freight. And he
Right.
says, all right, well, your new job is to go sit in the corner with Clark and go figure out how to cover Mexico freight or move more Mexico freight. And so it was me and this guy, Clark Campos, who works at Cargado now. And the two of us were sitting in the corner reporting to this guy, Bob Chappius, that's at Uber Freight now. And we just started going after it. And
Yeah.
there's an RFP that somebody had been that somebody else was handling. And I remember looking at this RFP, and it had like probably 150 lanes on it, all coming out of one city in Mexico, going all over the US and Canada. And so I'm looking at this and I'm going, no idea how to like price this stuff, but it's all coming out of the same place. And
Yeah.
Bob goes, call Stagecoach. Like the only carrier, he's like, try Stagecoach, try this other carrier. Like there's like 2 or 3 carriers, call Salo, call these 3 people. And so I called Stagecoach, and they're like, yeah, that goes through Laredo, and you can call this carrier for the Mexico leg. And then like don't you guys have a bunch of carriers in the US? And so I figured out that I could actually transload that freight and I could cover the Mexico portion separately from the US portion. And so I figured out a rate for the portion in Mexico up to the border. And then all I had to do was go into, the Coyote data and figure out what the rate was from Laredo to all these different destinations. And that made it a lot easier for me to price it. And
Wow. Yeah.
I priced it and we won a bunch of freight, and customers we'd love to give you guys some freight, but we want to see your warehouse in Laredo where you're going to do the transloading. And I'm like, I don't have a warehouse in Laredo. And
Yeah.
they're like, but here's the customs broker that you're going to want to work with. It's Carlos Zuniga, who has Zuniga Customs, I think, in Laredo. And so I called Carlos and introduced myself, and he's like, come down to Laredo and I'll show you my warehouse and you can show them that it's your warehouse, and we'll be partners on this. And I'm like, okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And because they have to clear the freight anyways, and so they have to do all the paperwork, and they have to see the commodity, the product anyways, and so it's gonna go to their dock no matter what. So might as well just also have them unload it instead of doing it somewhere else. And so I went down to their office or their facility in Laredo. This is my first time ever going to Laredo. Everybody was so welcoming and so willing to introduce you to other people. Mi casa, su casa is very, very real in Laredo.
Oh, wow.
And Carlos was like, this is your warehouse. You can tell them it's a Coyote warehouse or whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so I go to Laredo, I meet, you first of all, you drive around Laredo and you see that everything is trucking. All the traffic is from trucks.
Oh,
It's just warehouses, customs brokers, facilities, trucks everywhere. It's just all over the place. And so, you go there and you're like, holy cow, this is all they think about here. This is a freight person's, best thing ever. I was just debating somebody on LinkedIn because somebody posted about Chicago being the freight capital, which it is, not Chattanooga, but Laredo is the cross-border capital. And so I remember being in Laredo and coming back home to Chicago and just going, holy cow, that was the most impactful trip that I've ever been on, to go visit somewhere and everything happens in one place.
Yeah.
It's not like that anywhere else. It's not like Chicago. There's offices here for freight brokerages, but there's not all the trucking companies aren't here.
Right.
And some people have offices, but not everybody. And they're not all in Atlanta either. And they're not all in Dallas, but they're literally everybody that services Mexico through Laredo has a presence in Laredo.
Oh,
And
wow.
so you could get so much figured out by going there and spending time with people. And so I sent out an email to the whole company, and we had just bought Access America, probably a few months before that at the time. I remember sending an email to everybody and was like, you could make a ton of money booking Mexico freight. I just got back from Laredo. Everybody's willing to help, give us capacity, give us warehousing space.
Right.
This is the most incredible thing ever. And our inbox just got flooded because we had all these salespeople that were like, oh yeah, my customer's asking me for help. I just had my customer ask me about Mexico yesterday. And so all of this experience of going and running a bid and trying to figure out how to cover the freight and figure out if I'm going to tackle that, that's kind of
Yeah.
what went into building the Mexico team at Coyote, and what became the blueprint for, how we're building at Cargado too.
So interesting. Yeah, I think it seems so scary because I guess you hear I always hear herd. I can talk. I've always heard Mexico has the little triangle, and that's the only thing you can touch in Mexico. Everything else is terrifying. So then you're like, I'm scared to touch it at all. So myth or truth, right? What actually is it in Mexico as far as logistics and running it, and as far as the scariness of things?
Let's break it down a little bit differently. So there's 10 border cities that really matter. There's more than 10, but there's 10 where most of the freight flows through, which is Otay Mesa, which on the other side is Tijuana. So very, very common spot for freight to ship through, mainly coming out of Tijuana. There is freight that goes down to Cabo that gets delivered for the resorts down there, but that actually goes a different way. It's not usually going to San Diego and then down. Then there's Calexico. So there's a lot of freight being manufactured in Mexicali, which is right across the border from Calexico. Occasionally, or not occasionally, there's a good amount of freight that moves from central Mexico going across the country. up towards Mexicali into Calexico and into California.
Oh,
There's also a rail line that runs across that way called Ferromex. There's Nogales, where a lot of produce comes up through.
okay.
There's El Paso, which has Juarez across the border, and then just south of Juarez by about 200 miles, 240 miles, is Chihuahua. So it's another big city right there. Uh, there is some other freight that goes from central Mexico up through El Paso that feeds kind of the western half of the country of the United States. And then I've seen freight from like Monterrey go up through Juarez, but for the most part, it's El Paso, mainly from Juarez and Chihuahua. And then you have Laredo. 70% of freight coming from Mexico goes through Laredo into the United States. That golden triangle that you're talking about from Monterrey to Guadalajara to Mexico City, that forms that triangle, that goes through Laredo for primarily.
Okay.
And then you have FAR, which is, McAllen. Across from that is Reynosa. Reynosa has a lot of factories. It's also kind of a dangerous area. There is freight that comes from like the coast that's produce heavily, like from the the Gulf Coast right
Mhm.
there, that feeds up through FAR. And usually that'll be like produce, citrus, like anything that's going to funnel through that border city instead of through Laredo. And
Okay.
then the last border city is Brownsville. The other side of that is Matamoros. There are factories in that city too. And there's also like SpaceX, I think, is right in Brownsville or right near there, but not really doing anything cross border. Uh,
Yeah.
but so take these border cities and ignore Laredo for a second. There's every single one of these U.S. border cities has a sister city right across the border. Each
Okay.
of those border cities are primarily manufacturing hubs that are built entirely for export to the United States. So Tijuana, primarily built for export to the United States. Mexicali, Juarez, um, Acuna and Piedras Negras, which are across from Del Rio and Eagle Pass, those two smaller border cities north of Laredo, same deal. There's a Constellation facility that makes Corona beer in one of those cities. There's a Caterpillar, John Deere facilities over there. Like there's stuff that ships out of there, but it's not a ton. And then same thing with Reynosa and Matamoros. And so there is this term called maquiladora, which is a Mexican manufacturing facility that is built primarily for export to help drive more trade for Mexico. And so those are generally at the border. They get some sort of tax benefits in Mexico. They don't produce for Mexico. A lot of facilities, like I remember a beer facility in central Mexico that we used to ship for at one point. Back when I was brokering freight, 2 weeks out of the month they would produce for the U.S. with U.S. labels. The other 2 weeks they would produce for Mexico and Latin America, and the labels would be in Spanish versus English. And so, in this case, all these border cities, they're all entirely exports for Mexico or for Mexico to the United States. And so that golden triangle that you're talking about, like that is where most freight comes out of, but there's definitely freight outside of that. And it's okay, but it's not, if you're shipping something from like Veracruz, which is like eastern Mexico, like along the coast to of the Gulf, that is, shipping from Veracruz to Utah, like you're not going to get a lot of carrier engagement on that lane, because it's two tough markets. But Monterey to Atlanta, you could have 25 carriers that get really excited about a lane like that.
So if I am a broker, like dummy this down for me because I'm a dummy. So if I'm a broker, how would I even start? How do I even start having that conversation when I know nothing about even getting into it? Like, how do I start talking to my customers about it? How do I start my first lane? How do I do that?
I'm going to share the best advice my dad ever gave, which was shut up and listen. You ask the customer about it and they tell you, hey, what are you guys doing with Mexico? What are you guys doing with cross border? And then they just tell you. And if they're not doing it, then they're not doing it. And you're not going to like squeeze something out of, like you're not going to get something out of it if there's nothing there. But like, how does your Mexico business work today? We're starting to invest in Mexico. How does your cross-border business work today? How do you handle imports or exports? How are you moving Mexico freight or Canada freight? Canada counts too, right? Like
Yeah.
not as complicated, but so ask the question and they'll start telling you, and they'll just go, "Oh my God, it's the biggest headache." That's always how they respond. Oh man, you don't even want to get started. It's always their biggest headache. And
Yeah.
so start by asking that question and then let them tell you about it. And then you go, all right, and where do these pick up? And do you guys own the facility in Mexico, or is it a supplier that you work with? And if so, are you handling the door-to-door shipments? And if they say yes, then it's like, oh, great, I'd love to get pricing for you. How often is it moving? Is it something that's already moving? If it's already moving, by the way, that's great. If they're like thinking about doing it, like it's not an immediate opportunity for you. But if they're already doing it, then they already have a customs broker in mind that's doing the work for them. Like, you don't want to change any of that stuff. Just hear them out and say, if you want to email me over all the details, and they'll go, yeah, we have a facility in Monterey, we have a facility in Querétaro, and we ship to our 4 distribution centers in the United States. And you go, where's that crossing?
Yeah.
Is it Laredo? Or depending on where they say, like, or what city they say in Mexico, you kind of look at a map and figure it out, but they'll tell you. And then you go, all right, let me get you pricing. And then you go sign up with Cargado and you get a rate. But that's start by asking the question. And like the way that I think about trade with Mexico and with Canada is Mexico is nearshoring. Mexico is our nearby manufacturing hub. So we outsource manufacturing to Mexico. It's cheaper to do it there than it is to do it in the United States. It's closer than it is from Asia, and it makes it a lot easier to operate. It's also the same time zones or similar time zones. And so there are all these reasons why manufacturers, oh God, I'm hearing feedback. Now it's better. Sorry. There's all these reasons why manufacturers are relying on Mexico heavily. And so Mexico is used as a manufacturing hub. Canada is a trade partner. So we're trade partners with Mexico too, but we buy and sell stuff with Canada. We sell stuff to them, they sell stuff to us. So when you're talking to a manufacturer about what they're doing in Mexico, chances are that they're getting something from Mexico or they're using it for manufacturing. They're likely not selling into Mexico unless they're a supplier to somebody that's doing something in Mexico. So pretend like you're Volkswagen and you are buying, parts from Mexico, parts from the US, parts from Asia, from Europe, especially from Europe as a German company. And so you're buying from a tier 1 supplier in Mexico, Silver de Mexico assembly, and it's like the whole chassis or something for a car. And in Mexico, I have this company that I'm putting parts together that become a bigger piece. And so some of those parts I'm going to buy elsewhere in Mexico. Some of them I buy from overseas. Some of them come from the United States. And so there's some freight that'll ship from the US down to Mexico as part of assembly. So I'll receive like smaller parts. I'll assemble them together and then ship bigger stuff back up to the United States. So most of the time, 7 out of 10 times, usually I want to say it's going from Mexico to the United States, but occasionally it'll be going the other direction. So ask them the question and they'll tell you everything you need to know.
Huh. And it's really not like whenever you were showing everything in Birmingham, it's not as complicated. It's just regular logistics, really. It's just you're dealing with customs and it's not like insane. So I think, okay, let me back up a second. I think the most interesting thing that you brought up was the difference between the carriers who are just strictly Mexico carriers and like their liability and then the ones that have DOTs. And so it's like knowing the difference of like who to use and who to talk to and how to, have the right type of carriers. If you'll kind of explain all of that as well.
Yeah. So when you're moving, let's take an example from Guadalajara to Chicago. You want to move that door to door, meaning it stays on the same trailer all the way through. It does not get transloaded at the border. I know I gave that example with that one account where we did transload it, but most freight does not get transloaded. And so as a freight broker, you hire a trucking company based in Laredo, Texas, in the United States. They have a DOT number, they have an MC number, they have cargo insurance, general auto, and all that stuff. And you go, I need you guys to haul this load for me from Guadalajara to Chicago. They go and subcontract the Mexico portion from Guadalajara to Nuevo Laredo.
Okay.
And that's a Mexican trucking company that they're hiring to take it from Guadalajara to Nuevo Laredo. Now, as a freight broker, you're sending one rate confirmation to one carrier from Guadalajara to Chicago. They take a chunk of that and pay the Mexican carrier. They take a small amount and pay the transfer carrier. And then they pay their driver on the U.S. side to go from Laredo to Chicago, or from Nuevo Laredo to Chicago if it's a B1 driver. Now, there is no cargo insurance required in Mexico by law. So what that means is that in the United States, like in order to haul freight as a trucking company and as a freight broker, you have to have cargo insurance. Otherwise you can't do it. Like you just can't. The FMCSA doesn't permit it. In Mexico, those requirements don't exist. And so you have to, first of all, by default, it lands on the liability lands on the onus of the manufacturer, the beneficial cargo owner of the goods.
Wow.
They're responsible for the freight. If it is, if they want, they can try to get you to sign a contract, which happens sometimes, where it says that you're liable for it. And I've experienced this before, where we've had to pay for freight that, not here, obviously, Cargado, but like in previous roles, where freight got stolen and we had to reimburse for it. Otherwise, we would have lost the customer. And so it's like but I also had an instance where a customer tried to sue for like $1.6 million, but something happened in Mexico and they lost. So
Right.
like there's it, it's you don't really have the liability. And I always tell people if, usually the shipper has liability coverage already in place, like they have insurance for their goods wherever they are. But if they want the added layer, either you refer them to a Reliance Partners that has borderless coverage, or which is Mexico cargo insurance program that they offer, or a broker can buy it, or a carrier can buy it for that customer. But it's not, it doesn't go in your normal cargo policy like a domestic claim would.
Yeah. I think you said too, like the Mexico, the ones that are cargo, it's like pennies on the pound or something like that, right? Is if they do have something.
Yeah, something that's like 42,000 pounds ends up being $1,700 or $1,800 that gets reimbursed. So there is an amount that's required in Mexico, but it is pennies on the pound. So it's a fraction. Like you're not getting the $100,000 or the $75,000 that the load's worth.
Yeah. And now is Canada similar, or are they like the US?
No, Canada, there's insurance. Although I don't think it's quite the same, but I think the expectation on a cross-border truckload move is that it's similar.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting.
One other thing that I want to encourage people about, like when you get that first load, the first question is, great, I'd love to get introduced to your customs broker. I want to make sure people don't just like wander into this blindly, and we coach people through this stuff anyways, but like the customs broker is the one that is handling the liability or the taxes and duties that are applied or filed on behalf of the manufacturer, the importer of record. So when something's going from Mexico to the United States, it's getting imported into the United States. That means the company, like if I were in Mexico selling you something in the United States, you'd be responsible for the duties and taxes that need to be paid on those goods that are imported, which is why we're hearing about this de minimis thing right now with things coming from overseas, and why all of a sudden there's taxes on things that were normally not taxed under $800 for like a package you might get on like Shein or Temu or whatever. Same issue. So like customs broker handles filing all the paperwork with the U.S. government or the Mexican government, depending on where it's going. And they act on behalf of the manufacturer. So you're not necessarily trying to replace them. You work with them. And so that's the question that you want to ask is, hey, who's your customs broker? Can you connect me with them? We will work with them to make sure that your freight gets cleared. And so anytime there's a problem at the border, they can help you with that stuff. Now, one thing that we have is we've got a couple experts on our team, more than a couple, but like we've got some Mexico freight experts on our team that do everything from, this Mexico 101 sales training. So we will do, the version of what you saw me do in Birmingham, a little bit more extended and individualized towards like sales people at freight brokerages. So they feel empowered to be able to go sell cross-border capacity to their customer base. And then we'll do Mexico 101 operations support, which is you win your first load. You're not really sure what you're supposed to do. Like we're on Slack or Teams with you, and we're coaching you through how to kind of handle that first load so that you get your second load, your third load, all of a sudden you start to build confidence. Then you get to a point where you're doing 10 loads a day, you should hire a Mexico operations person. But until you get to that point, our team will coach you. And so now I can brag about the product.
Well, a quick question with that. So basically, you're saying like get the freight first before you go into hiring a Mexican operations person. Like you should get the freight first and then build that up. They'll put the wagon before the horse. Is that the right way to say that? Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you think about demand like driving what you do. We went to Canada because our customers asked us to. What I understand about when Arrive acquired Forager was that a lot of their customer base said, we have Mexico freight we need help with. It wasn't just like one day, I was like, I want to go buy a company. Like there's a demand that comes, that accrues for that before you start thinking about doing that. And so figure it out first, like, get your customers to give you enough freight to make it a thing where you need to invest. And then you go find the first Spanish speaker on the team and go, we're turning you into the Mexico person. Because finding that Mexico expert that's already done it for 5 or 10 years, they're already either like, they're in a role that like doesn't necessarily make sense to hire in like from. And so you're better off doing that homegrown and figuring out the muscle memory while also understanding that the culture is very different. And so you need to be able to blend that.
So whenever you're talking to these cross-border brokers, do you need to be like vetting them, and are they speaking English, or do you need to have like Google Translate while you're talking to them? How does that normally work?
Me?
Or anybody, like a broker just meeting, if you're talking to your shipper and you're like, who's your cross-border? You said that was the first question. So then am I needing to do special things with that cross-border broker?
Well, the customs broker.
Customs broker. Wow.
The customs broker.
For Mexico 101. I don't know anything.
Okay, so here's the thing about people in Laredo. They all want to see other people succeed. They're not selfish. Like they work together, they collaborate. It is a very unique culture at the border in general and in Mexico. Like they want to help you.
Okay.
They're not like, how do I screw this guy over and go take their freight? Like
Yeah.
there's a carrier that I met a year plus ago that at the Broker Carrier Summit that talked about the fact that they were like very badly struggling to find more freight. And when they got access to Cargado, which is free for carriers, they started to match with all these brokers. By, a year later, they were doing consistent business with 5 or 6 new brokers, and they'd grown their fleet, and they were like, they beat, potential bankruptcy, and they're alive and growing now. And so they only did that. They were only able to do that because they were like willing to go up and talk to people, and because I carry that same concept of like making sure we help people. And so, you go talk to a carrier in Laredo, you go talk to a customs broker and you tell them, I have this opportunity that I'm trying to convert. Like they will help you convert it. They're not going to try to figure out how to go around you and go take it. They want to see you succeed because they know you could go get 5 more deals. They know you can go get 10 more. They don't have a sales team. They're just a 100 truck fleet in Laredo. They're a customs broker, one of hundreds in Laredo or thousands. Like they're a small piece of the whole process. And so they're much more likely to want to be collaborative than your average logistics company that you might come across in the US.
Yeah, totally different mindset then, because that's not how we operate in the US at all. It's very much like
No,
yeah.
I know everyone wants to act like they can do everything themselves. And like at the border, it's like, no, I can connect you with everybody.
Yeah. That network is huge. Well, very cool. Okay, so now get into your product. Tell me all the things like how did you even come up with this idea to have this? Was it just because you saw there was a need there, or how did this process come into play?
So when I was building Forager, there was a point where we had some freight brokers that were customers. So we were co-brokering or double brokering, whatever you want to call it, co-brokering. But we had brokers that were customers. Forager was a digital freight broker. So we were like a Convoy and Uber Freight, but for cross-border freight. And we'd raised venture capital, but our customers were shippers. And we were focused on trying to get freight and move freight and make money as a freight brokerage. And I hated the revenue model. I wanted to be a subscription model. But we were reliant on the traditional freight model that exists today. And the demands of shippers, we had some really big shippers, like really, really big shippers that we had signed up at Forager for being a startup. But every shipper wants something different. And there was a point where I got a lecture from my dad when it was definitely a little bit late in the process, where he said, you have an identity crisis. You're trying to build a freight brokerage and a tech company at the same time. You can't build both of those things. And I was like, I don't want to build a freight brokerage. And so I tried to go sell the freight brokerage to people, or I tried to shut it down. The board said you can't shut down. At the time we were doing like $30 million a year in gross revenue, like nothing crazy, but like a good starting point for a Mexico, Canada business. And so I tried to pivot at that point to being a load board, and it was not really doable given where we were as a business, the cap table and all that stuff. And so I ended up getting acquired, but this had been on my mind since then. And then I remember, thinking about the fact that one, we had some freight brokers that really liked our software. They were using us as as an extension of their Mexico team. But they would use our software, the shipper tool that we had built. They used that as if they were a shipper, to get rates and book their own loads in our system. And then we had a carrier side load board that carriers could book from. And so we were, automating the like building and booking. It was just like hard to get the whole thing to happen, like with an engineering team of 8 people, like at that point. Now with 8 people, you could do a lot more with AI. But so we I spent a year and a half at Arrive after they acquired Forager, and remember getting asked, like, if you could build Forager all over again, what would you do differently? And I said, well, I would have built a tech company to help freight brokers scale their cross-border business, not build a freight brokerage. And so once I left, at the end of September of 2023, I got started on building this out, and knew I needed a technical co-founder and investors, and raised a $3.2 million pre-seed round from Iron Spring, which is Ty Finley. He's down in Austin, and Esteban from Zenda, and Nicole Wishoff from Wishoff Ventures, Seal Bloom, Craig Fuller, my brother, a bunch of other people invested, bunch of entrepreneurs in the industry, and we got started. And Convoy died right around the same time. And so I met Rylan. I wanted to build a load board for cross-border freight. I did not have there was like a mapping that I'd kind of written out that on a dry erase board that I still have a picture of, that's like actually the timeline's kind of been hit for a lot of it. But it wasn't until I met Rylan that like the concept of this true collaboration platform kind of came into being. And so we hit it off really well right when Convoy died, and partnered up, and he brought with him a handful of engineers. We got started, and technically, I mean, the company was formed in October, but the team started operating in November. And 3 months later, we had a way for carriers to fill out their profiles. Another month and a half later, we had V1 of the load board with Nolan Transportation and a couple other brokers ready to get started. And now have well over 200 brokers, including half of the top 100. And it's both loads and lanes. So freight brokers can post loads, spot freight, but they can also post contracted freight. So they can post freight that they have consistently or that they're bidding on. So they can post it and say, I'm bidding on this. I don't actually own this yet. Whether it's to try to find a truck in hand for a single load, or try to find a carrier that can run a lane.
Yeah.
So brokers can cover their spot freight. They can source dedicated capacity. That's how it started, purely as a load board and marketplace for cross-border freight from Mexico. We then expanded it to support Canada. And in this time frame, as we built out this marketplace, we collected tens of thousands of bids.
Yeah.
And so we've taken all those bids and turned that into a pricing engine that provides rates now. And so now freight brokers, 3PLs, freight forwarders, they can use our software to post spot and contracted Mexico and Canada freight, cross-border Mexico, domestic Mexico, and cross-border Canada. And they can get rates through the UI. They can use an Excel add-in that we are just rolling out right now, where they can run an entire RFP a matter of minutes. So that example I gave you at the very beginning of that RFP, that I had to do by hand, that would have taken 5 minutes.
Wow.
And then we have a rating API that people can build to if they wanted to pull it into their own pricing engine.
So does your RFP then work similar, like what you were saying, how it's this section of it plus the domestic side, like the...
That's how our data has it. captured is, so like when a carrier submits a bid on a cross-border Mexico load, they'd break down their bid. And so we have that broken down bid data that allows us to feed the pricing engine, if you will, to drive, more accurate rates and to provide more rate coverage. So if you wanted a rate from Guadalajara to Buffalo, New York, but nobody had ever moved Guadalajara to Buffalo through our marketplace. However, we've seen a lot of data from Guadalajara to the border to different places in the U.S. We've seen enough data from other parts of Mexico to Buffalo. So we have the rates from Guadalajara to Laredo and from Laredo to Buffalo. We could stitch all that together and give you a rate from Guadalajara to Buffalo. And that reflects in the confidence score and all that stuff as far as like how accurate the rate is. But it allows us to provide a lot of coverage really kind of broadly.
Yeah, that's really cool. So the carriers, their experience on it is just simply to post their trucks, or do they have additional, I guess, uses for it as well?
A big part of our marketplace is driven by the knowledge of the carrier base that we have in the system. So when carriers get onboarded, they tell us where they service, what lanes they like to haul, where they like to pick up and deliver, where they like to cross and all that stuff. We use that data to surface the right freight to them and feed it up to them. They can also post their trucks, and we're working on ways to automate that with AI, but they can, whether it's their consistent lanes that they're looking for or their ad hoc capacity, we feed them freight based on what they're looking for, so that they're not just like, there's no phone calls, like no email addresses being listed anywhere. It's just you post, you bid, you match, you get connected through our system, and you communicate and keep going from there.
So you're not getting a bunch of bogus calls for nothing. But it's really
No one's phone's blown up.
Wow. That's wild, by the way. I can't even imagine that.
Yeah. Oh, the best, like, if people are like, yeah, my phone's going to blow up, and it's like, then don't put like, you can, if there's a carrier that's running a lane and you're like not happy with how they're performing, you can repost the lane, but you can block them from seeing it. So, you could actually, like, you could exclude carriers. You could eventually be able to kind of frame the freight only to certain carriers if you want to, routing guides and all that stuff. So like, there's, everybody always asks like where we're going and where we're expanding, because we've only been live for a year and a few months, but our expansion, started with cross-border Mexico, then we went to cross-border Canada and domestic Mexico, and we'll open up domestic Canada at some point. Everyone's like, oh, are you gonna go to the US? And it's like, I'm gonna let those guys fight that over right now. We're more focused on going deeper into how people collaborate.
Yeah.
And building more for how freight brokers and trucking companies and everybody involved in supply chain kind of bring information together. We want to help across that entire spectrum rather than trying to just expand geographically.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to Europe next.
It's
It's more about stacking functionality within the current markets that we're in than it is going into new markets right now.
Well, it definitely sounds like, because you're a broker too, like you have a broker's mentality.
We're not. Oh, yeah, used to be. Yeah.
Used to be, yeah. Sorry. I'm not putting that on you. No, because it used to be, you have like your functionality, like just like what you're saying, like blocking the carrier from being able to see it. That is huge. Or like having it where certain, I don't like this carrier. I don't ever want them to see my stuff. They should have that on every load board, I think.
We can also block carriers at the level, at like the company level, but we can, like we've talked about, the idea is to integrate with as many technology providers as possible, whether it's TMS providers, security, quality, identity, compliance, whatever you want to call the category. But like understanding which carriers are approved and which ones are not, like piping that into the product itself and enabling brokers to be more secure. We don't want this to be a free for all. Like we very much a believer in enabling more people to connect and transact and do business together, but it's not a free for all. Like, and it's as like liberal as I am, like we want this to be secure. We want this to be safe. We do not encourage any of the stuff that's going on right now, like the driver Inc. stuff for Canada, the illegal B1 driver stuff. If a B1 driver is performing cabotage, like, I'd rather kick the carrier out of the network than have that capacity if they're going to do things the wrong way. So we're very big on making sure that this is structured the right way for freight to move safely and securely.
Okay, so since you brought it up, I'm glad you did. Go ahead and tell me all this down for me on because you made a post on this on LinkedIn.
Driver Inc.
Like, this is so interesting. Like, like I said, I've never been a carrier, so like I don't understand how any of this stuff works. Like, I do hear in the US how some similar things happen where it's like totally scams happening and carriers are paying for like insurance they don't actually have. So explain what is it called again? Canadian Inc. or whatever? Or
Driver Inc.
Driver Inc.
The idea is a trucking company in Canada says to a driver, it's just the driver. It's not usually an owner operator with a fleet or with a truck. It's just a driver in the company truck. They say, you should set up your own business. You'll be like an entrepreneur that way. Set up your own Canadian trucking entity, and we will pay you to sit in our truck and drive our truck. And instead of them, paying the amount on top of that to the government to pay the taxes and everything else that goes along with it, they keep that money. Whereas when you have an employee on your payroll and you employ them and pay them through normal payroll, you have to pay those taxes and all that stuff. And so there's this whole movement. And what it does is it allows these trucking companies in Canada, they're not necessarily netting that whole difference. It's not like people are necessarily being greedy as much as they're using that to try to like be more competitive on their pricing to customers. And so it's like pulling rates down in the market a little bit. And carriers are like kind of getting squeezed if they're not participating. Most of them do not participate, but the few that do that kind of make it unfair for everybody.
Yeah, because then they're not getting any benefits of like insurance or really anything.
Yeah, well, and then the government eventually, if they figure it out, they go after the driver and not the carrier, or they go after the driver and the carrier. But like the government gets screwed. So like there's people that pay their taxes in Canada, there are people that don't. It's the same way that people feel about it in the United States when people are working in the US and not paying their taxes. So like there's a similar issue that from the feedback I heard after I posted that, similar issue in the United States, but it's the more every time I go to Canada, I hear about it. Everyone wants to know how we're going to help defend against it. I'm like, there's only so much we can do, but if there becomes a way to do it, we will help. But yeah, it's not great, but it's definitely something to call attention to.
Yeah, no, and I think you do a good job about that on all your posts, calling attention to things that, whatever's happening in the market. Or I always learn something new when you see you post. So, well, cool. Thanks for coming on. And I'm sure we'll see each other soon. I know I'll see you at the Broker Care Summit, but I'm sure there's other conferences we'll run into. So we'll have to grab a selfie while we're out.
McLeod User Conference?
Yeah, I'll be there. Yes. Well, bye, everybody.
Tell me everything. Tell me everything.